What Officer Dale Greer did not know, could not have known, because he had not bothered to find out, was that the woman sitting quietly in the passenger seat of the black Lexus had spent the last 16 years building federal civil rights cases against men exactly like him. He did not know that she had walked into police departments in 4 states and walked out with indictments. He did not know that she carried a gold badge in her inner blazer pocket and a 16-year record that had never once been successfully challenged in federal court. He did not know any of that because when he saw the Lexus moving through Hargrove Heights on that Sunday evening, he did not see a federal agent's car. He saw a black man in an expensive vehicle on a quiet residential street, and he had already decided what that meant before he touched his lights. It was the worst decision of his career. He just didn't know it yet. The evening came in slow and amber over Hargrove Heights, the way summer evenings always did in that part of Tennessee, unhurried and warm, the light going soft before it went dark, the oak trees holding on to the last of it in their high branches, while the streets below settled into shadow. Porch lights were clicking on one by one down the length of Hargrove Street, small yellow beacons appearing in the dusk like something being lit by hand. Somewhere a screen door swung open, and the smell of someone's Sunday pot roast drifted out into the evening air, rich and heavy, the kind of smell that belonged to a particular kind of afternoon. A child's bicycle lay on its side at the edge of someone's front yard. 2 women stood at a fence line 2 houses down, talking in low voices, their laughter rising once and then settling back into the quiet. Dr. Marcus Webb drove with both hands on the wheel, the way his father had taught him when he was 15 years old, sitting in the passenger seat of a tan Buick on a Sunday afternoon, very much like this one. Not because he had to. He had been driving for more than 20 years and had never once been pulled over for anything that was actually his fault. He drove with both hands on the wheel because he had learned a long time ago that careful men lived longer, and that this particular lesson meant something different for a man who looked like him in a car like this, on a street like this, at an hour like this. It was not something he thought about consciously anymore. It had moved beyond thought into the body, into habit, into the particular kind of vigilance that sits in the shoulders and does not let go. The Lexus moved quietly through the neighborhood, the engine barely making a sound. It was a black sedan 4 years old, bought outright with a check he had written himself after his first full year as an attending cardiologist at Memphis Memorial. He had sat in the dealership parking lot for 20 minutes after signing the paperwork, just looking at it before he drove it home. His mother had cried when she saw it, though she denied it afterward and said she had something in her eye. His father had been gone by then, 3 years already, and Marcus had placed his hand on the hood of the car and stood there for a moment before getting in, not for any particular reason he could have named. He was wearing his good church jacket tonight, charcoal gray with silver buttons, the buttons that his father had given him along with the jacket when Marcus graduated from medical school. These buttons were your grandfather's. His father had told him, pressing the folded jacket into his arms. He wore them the day he testified in front of a county board that said he didn't have the right to own his own property. He was the calmest man in that room. Marcus had worn the jacket to every important occasion since. He wore it to his mother's hospital when she had her knee surgery. He wore it to his father's funeral. He wore it tonight because Sunday dinner at his mother's house on Hargrove Street was in its way the most important occasion on his calendar. His wife Celeste sat in the passenger seat with her legs crossed at the ankle and her hands folded in her lap, her cream pinstripe blazer still looking as pressed and precise as it had when she put it on that morning. She was looking out the window at the neighborhood drifting past. The painted porches, the oak trees that had been there since before either of them was born, the Baptist church on the corner with the marquee sign that had been missing its letter D for going on 6 months. She had known this neighborhood since she married Marcus 14 years ago. She knew which houses had gardens in the back, and which ones had dogs that barked at strangers, and which ones had been in the same family for 3 or 4 generations. She knew that the yellow house on the corner, with the white trim, belonged to Reverend Gloria Marsh, who had lived there for 40-something years, and who had become, over the course of those decades, something close to the unofficial memory of Hargrove Heights. What the neighborhood did not know about Celeste Webb What most people who met her socially did not know, because she did not wear it visibly or discuss it casually, was that she was a special agent with the FBI's Civil Rights Division 16 years in, and that the quiet authority she carried in her posture was not the product of personality alone. It was the product of having walked into rooms where the people on the other side of the table had power and had abused it, and having walked out of those rooms with their careers in a federal filing. She had not told Marcus she was thinking about any of that tonight. She was thinking about his mother, who had looked better than last month, and about the pot roast they had eaten, and about the sound the oak trees made when the evening wind moved through them. "Your mama looked good today," she said, still looking out the window. She did, Marcus agreed. Better than last month. He glanced over at her profile for a moment. She ate well, too. 2 plates, Celeste said. I counted. Don't tell her I noticed. Celeste smiled without turning. I would never. He turned onto the main stretch of Hargrove Street and eased the Lexus into the right lane. The road was nearly empty in both directions. The speed limit was 35, and he was doing 33. The evening had reached the point where the sky above the rooftops was a deep, clean blue, and the light had turned dim and almost golden. Marcus felt the particular satisfaction of a Sunday that had been exactly what a Sunday was supposed to be. He was 2 miles from home. That was when the blue lights came on behind him. He felt it in his chest before he had processed what he was seeing in the rearview mirror. Not panic. He was not a man who panicked easily. Not in his profession. Not when someone's heart had stopped on the table, and every decision made in the next 45 seconds was the only thing standing between them and everything that came after. What he felt was something older and quieter than panic. A cold knowing that lived somewhere below the level of thought. A knowledge written into him not by anything he had done, but by everything that had been done to men who looked like him for generations before he was born. He checked the speed limit on the sign they had just passed, 35. He checked his own speed, 33. He checked his taillights in his memory. He had had them serviced 2 weeks ago, both working perfectly. He checked his registration sticker, current. He checked everything he could check in the 4 seconds between seeing the lights and pulling over. Celeste went very still beside him. Neither of them spoke. He signaled right. He slowed gradually smooth, and even no sudden movements. He pulled to the curb in front of a stretch of sidewalk with a clear porch light across the street where there would be visibility, where people could see. He put the car in park. He turned off the engine. He pressed the button to lower his window, then placed both hands at the top of the steering wheel, fingers spread wide, palms visible. In the side mirror, the patrol cruiser sat behind him with its lights still spinning. The door opened. A figure got out. Marcus watched the officer approach in the mirror, tall, broad across the shoulders, moving with the particular slow swagger of a man who had never once in recent memory been told no. His right hand rested on his holster before he had even reached the rear of the Lexus. He stopped at Marcus's window. His name tag read Greer in raised block letters above a silver star. He was somewhere in his late 40s, with a jaw that looked like it had been set permanently against something a buzz cut, growing out unevenly on the sides, and eyes that were the color of winter creek water, pale gray, carrying no warmth whatsoever. His uniform was pressed, but his demeanor had the quality of a man who had been doing this job long enough to stop pretending to enjoy most of it. Greer looked into this car with the methodical deliberateness of someone checking inventory. His eyes moved across the interior. The leather seats, the clean dashboard, the small stack of medical journals on the back seat, the woman in the cream blazer in the passenger seat. He looked at Marcus's church jacket with the silver buttons. He looked at Marcus's face. His expression during this assessment was not hostile, exactly. It was the face of a man cataloging data against a picture he already had in his mind, and finding that the data and the picture did not line up in a way he found acceptable. He said nothing for a moment, just looked. "License and registration," he said finally. "Not good evening." Not, "Do you know why I stopped you?" Just the words flat and cold, delivered in the tone of someone speaking to an object that had been placed in front of them and needed to be processed. "Of course, Officer," Marcus said. His voice stayed steady. He had practiced steady for most of his adult life, and it did not fail him now. My wallet is in my inside left jacket pocket, and the registration is in the glove compartment. I'm going to reach for them now." He narrated the movements deliberately, the way he had learned to narrate them. "May I ask what this stop is about?" Something shifted in Greer's face at that. Subtle, a flicker behind the eyes, a small rearrangement of the muscles around his jaw. Marcus noticed it, the way he noticed things across operating tables and in hospital corridors. He recognized the look. It was not anger yet. It was the thing that came before anger in a person accustomed to a particular dynamic who had just encountered something that did not fit it. The expression of a man who had just been answered by someone he did not expect to answer him. Greer looked down at the license when Marcus handed it over. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked up, and his eyes made another slow pass through the interior of the car. "You drift back there," he said. "Across the lane marker." "I saw it." "I don't believe I did," Sir Marcus said, carefully quietly. "I know this road well. I've been driving it for years." The shift in Greer's face this time was more pronounced. It moved through something like surprise and settled somewhere harder. He was a man who had been politely but clearly contradicted by a person he had not expected to contradict him. And he did not like it. Not because he was certain he was right about the lane drift, but because the act of being questioned registered as defiance. And defiance in Dale Greer's world required a response. He handed the license back without looking at Marcus. He looked instead at Officer Kyle Tatum, his partner, who had come around to the passenger side and was standing near the rear bumper. Tatum was younger, mid-20s, patchy beard, the kind of nervousness behind the eyes that belonged to someone who had not yet fully committed to the particular version of this job that his senior partner practiced. He was watching the interaction with an expression Marcus could read from the driver's seat, the expression of someone who was not sure about this, but was also not about to say so. Sir Greer said, and his voice had dropped half a register, gone quieter, which was somehow worse. "I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle." Marcus did not move immediately. Not out of defiance. He had no interest in defiance tonight. He had a surgical consult at 6:30 tomorrow morning, and he wanted to get home and sleep, but out of the deep calibrated reflex that told him to slow down, to think, to not give this man a single frame of footage that could be edited into something it was not. "Officer," he said, "can you help me understand why I need to step out?" Greer said nothing. "Out of the vehicle. Now." Marcus heard Celeste's hand find the door handle. He touched her arm once gently, without looking at her. "Wait." Then he opened his own door. He stepped out onto the sidewalk slowly, both hands rising immediately to shoulder height, fingers spread wide, palms facing Greer. He stood still. He did not reach for anything. He did not move toward Greer or away from him. He simply stood in the amber light from the porch across the street, with his arms out, and waited. Across the street, a 17-year-old named Devin Marsh, Reverend Marsh's grandson, home for the summer from his first year at Tennessee State, had been sitting on the top porch step with his phone in his hand since the cruiser lights came on. He was watching. He had been watching since the moment the patrol car pulled up behind the Lexus, the way young men in this neighborhood had learned to watch police interactions, because things could change fast and you needed to know which way they were going. Devin set his phone very carefully against the wooden railing of the porch, angled toward the street, and pressed record. None of the three men by the sedan noticed. Greer came around the front of the car slowly, as though he had all the time in the world. He stopped a few feet from Marcus and looked him up and down the way you look at something you have already made a decision about. Behind him, Tatum hung back near the rear bumper, with his thumb hooked in his belt and his face pointed at the pavement. "You got anything in the car I should know about?" Greer asked. "No, sir." "Weapons? Drugs?" "No, sir." Greer began to walk a slow half-circle around Marcus. Marcus tracked him with his eyes without moving his feet. Greer's eyes moved over Marcus's jacket, his slacks, his shoes. He let the silence sit for a moment, the way some men use silence as a kind of pressure. "Officer," Marcus said, keeping his voice low and steady, "I've complied fully. I'd like to understand what the probable cause was for—" "What did you just say to me?" Greer had gone very still, his head tilted forward, chin dropping slightly. His right hand dropped to his belt. "I asked what I was stopped for," Officer Marcus said more carefully now. "That's all." "You're stopped," Greer said, taking one step closer. "Because I said so." That's all you need to know. Across the street, Devon was very still. His phone was recording. A woman on the neighboring porch stood up from her chair. An old man who had been walking a small dog paused on the sidewalk across the street, the leash going slack in his hand. "Turn around," Greer said. "Hands on the hood." Nolan turned. He placed both palms flat on the warm metal of his own car. He stared at his own reflection in the hood, stretched and darkened in the black paint. "Stay calm. Get home." "You people," Greer muttered low and sharp, moving in close behind him, "come into this neighborhood with your fancy cars and your fancy clothes and think that means something." Marcus felt his jaw lock. He said nothing. "Thinking you're better than everybody else. Thinking the rules don't apply." "I haven't broken any rules," Marcus said quietly. That was all it took. Greer grabbed him by the collar of the charcoal church jacket, his father's jacket, the jacket with the silver buttons that had belonged to his grandfather, and slammed him forward onto the hood of the car. The sound it made was enormous, a flat percussive crack that broke through the soft evening air of Hargrove Street, like something being split open, like the sound of a season changing all at once. It rolled down the block and hit the houses, and came back. It made the women at the fence line stop talking. It made the dog at the end of the block start up again. On Reverend Marsh's porch, Devon went completely still. Marcus's chest hit the metal hard. His cheek struck the hood a half-second later, and the impact traveled up through his teeth and his jaw and the back of his skull in a single sharp wave. For one long stretched second, the world was nothing but the smell of hot metal and the hard surface pressing into his face and the pressure of Greer's hands wrenching his arms up behind his back. "Non-compliant," Greer announced loudly in the tone of someone reading from a script. Subject was non-compliant. On the porch across the street, Devon was not breathing. His phone was still recording. The railing held it perfectly still. Inside the Lexus, Celeste Webb did not make a sound. She sat in the passenger seat and watched everything through the windshield with the precise cataloging attention of someone conducting a field assessment. She had been conducting field assessments in one form or another for 16 years. She was very good at them. She was good at separating what she was feeling from what she was seeing and at understanding that how you responded in the first 10 seconds of a situation determined what options remained in the next 10 minutes. What she was feeling right now, watching her husband's cheek pressed against the hood of their car with a man's hand twisted into the back of his father's jacket, existed well below the threshold of what she would allow to reach her face or her hands or her voice. She had learned long ago that the emotion was real and she was entitled to it, and she could feel it fully later in private when the work was done. Right now there was work to do. Her eyes moved from Marcus's face, eyes open and controlled breathing. Steady, to Greer's hand, twisted into the gray jacket, to the silver buttons catching the porch light, to Tatum standing at the rear bumper with his hand half raised and his mouth slightly open. Tatum was hesitating. She had seen that hesitation 100 times in 100 different contexts, and she knew exactly what it meant and exactly how little it would ultimately matter. Tatum reached for his cuffs. "Not yet," something said inside Celeste. "Not yet. Not like this." She had thought during the seconds between Marcus stepping out and Greer slamming him down about the exact calculus of this moment. She knew who she was. She knew what she carried in her blazer pocket. She had made a precise determination about when to use it and what using it at the wrong moment could cost, not just tonight, not just this case, but everything the case could become if handled correctly. But Tatum was reaching for his cuffs. Her hand moved to her blazer, to the inner pocket. Her fingers found the edge of the leather credential case she had carried for 16 years through field operations in 4 states. Through courtrooms and depositions, through moments far more physically dangerous than this quiet street. She had carried it into situations where carrying it had required genuine courage, not the theoretical kind, but the kind that lives in the stomach. She opened the passenger door. It did not swing wide. It did not bang against its hinges. It opened the way Celeste did everything she did, with purpose, controlled, deliberate, with exactly the amount of force the moment required, and not 1 ounce more. She stepped out onto the sidewalk. She smoothed the front of her cream blazer with one hand, the gesture so precise and so calm that it stopped Tatum's hand on his cuffs, and she walked around the front of the sedan. She did not run. Running was for people who had lost control of a situation. She had not lost control of anything. She walked with the measured, even stride of someone who knew exactly where she was going and had already decided what she would do when she got there. Greer heard her footsteps and looked up. His expression was already composing itself into the specific look that certain men produce when a woman approaches an interaction they consider to be none of her business, patient, dismissive, faintly contemptuous, already preparing the words that will send her back to the car. He never got the chance to say them. Celeste reached into the inner pocket of her blazer. Her fingers closed around the leather credential case with the ease of someone picking up something they have set down and picked up several thousand times. She pulled it out. She flipped it open with one clean, practiced motion, and she held it up in the space between herself and Officer Dale Greer at a height and an angle where it was completely, absolutely, irrefutably impossible to miss. The gold badge caught the last of the evening light. The light hit the federal seal and threw it back into the dimming air of Hargrove Street. "Special Agent Celeste Webb," she said. Her voice was calm. It was clear. It carried without being raised, traveling the full length of the block in the still evening air, reaching Devon's phone on the porch railing, reaching the woman standing up from her chair, reaching the old man with the slack leash. FBI, Civil Rights Division. She took one step closer to Greer. "Officer, you will release my husband, right now." Hargrove Street went absolutely silent. Greer's grip on Marcus's wrist loosened, not all at once, not willingly. It loosened the way a grip loosens when the hands receive a message the brain has not quite fully approved yet, the body acting on some deeper calculation while the ego worked out what to do next. His eyes moved from the badge to Celeste's face and back to the badge. The federal seal, the gold, the photograph and the lettering, FBI, Civil Rights Division. He was reading it. He was reading it a second time. Across the street, Devon had stopped breathing. On the neighboring porch, the woman who had stood up from her chair brought both hands to her mouth. Tatum took one full step backward. Greer released Marcus's wrists. Marcus pushed himself off the hood with both hands, slowly finding his footing, and straightened up. He rolled his shoulders back with a careful, deliberate dignity, the same dignity that had been in his posture when he stepped out of the car with his hands raised, the dignity that had not left him even face down on the hood of his own car. He turned around. His church jacket hung wrong at the right shoulder where Greer had grabbed it. The seam at the shoulder had torn a clean split in the gray fabric. There was a thin, dark line above his left cheekbone, where the edge of the hood had caught him, already beating with blood. He did not reach up to touch it. He stood there breathing and looked at his wife. Celeste did not look back at him. Not yet. Her eyes were fixed on Greer with the specific absolute attention of someone making sure the person they are looking at understands the full weight of what has just occurred. The silence on the block stretched. Then Greer squared his shoulders. He looked at the credential case one more time. He looked at Celeste's face. And then something moved behind his eyes that was worse than confusion and worse than embarrassment. It was calculation. A man deciding in real time, right there on the sidewalk, with a federal badge 6 feet from his face, that he was not going to give a single inch. That yielding now, in front of a witness, in front of a neighborhood, would cost him something he was not willing to pay. "Badge or not," Ma'am Greer said. His voice was flat and deliberate. He took his time with it. "Your husband was non-compliant. I was within my rights. I'd suggest you put those credentials away and let us finish our business here." The words landed on the quiet evening air like stones dropped into still water. Celeste did not blink. "You slammed an unarmed man onto the hood of his own vehicle," she said for asking a question. He had both hands visible. He had complied with every instruction. What you have described as non-compliance was a physician asking an officer for the legal basis of a traffic stop. That is not non-compliance. That is a constitutional right. She took one additional step forward. What you did tonight is a federal civil rights violation, and you know it. Greer smiled, small and tight, not reaching his eyes. The smile of someone who has decided that 19 years on the force and a department that has always protected him means a woman with a badge on a neighborhood street does not represent the actual consequences of anything. "You have a good evening now," he said. Then he turned to Tatum, gave one short nod toward the cruiser, and walked away from them. His boots on the pavement made a sound that was perfectly ordinary, perfectly unhurried. No apology. No acknowledgement, just the back of Dale Greer's uniform retreating toward the cruiser. Celeste kept her credentials raised until both cruiser doors had closed. She kept her face completely still until the taillights disappeared around the corner at the far end of the block. Then she lowered the badge and turned to her husband. He was standing beside the car with his right hand raised to his cheek, now pressing gently against the cut. His eyes steady, but carrying something in them that went deeper than the hour, something that had been there before tonight and would still be there tomorrow and the day after. Something that was not simply about this evening on this street, but about every evening on every street that had accumulated into this one. She stepped forward and took his face in both hands, tilting it toward the porch light to look at the cut. She examined it the way he might have examined something in a clinical context, with precision, with care, with the kind of attention that communicates you matter, and I am paying attention to you more clearly than any particular words could. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Behind them, Reverend Marsh's porch light was on. The older woman was already rising from her chair, moving with the careful, unhurried steadiness of a woman who had seen enough decades of this world to understand that some things required your presence whether or not you were ready to give it. Across the street, Devon quietly lifted his phone from the railing and checked that the video had saved. Every second of it. Clear. The cruiser was gone, but Hargrove Street had not relaxed. People stood on their porches the way people stand after something bad happens in a neighborhood, not ready to go inside, not sure whether the danger had passed or only moved somewhere they couldn't see yet. Devon came down Reverend Marsh's porch steps with his phone held out in front of him like an offering. He crossed Hargrove Street quickly and stopped a few feet from Celeste. "Miss Celeste," he said. He had known her since he was small enough to sit in her lap at church picnics. "I got the whole thing." Celeste took the phone gently. She pressed play. The footage was steady. The railing had held the phone perfectly still through all of it, and the angle from the porch across the street had caught the scene with a clarity she had not expected. Everything was visible. She watched Greer approach the driver's window. She watched Marcus step out with his hands raised to shoulder height. Fingers spread the silver buttons on his jacket, catching the light. She watched Greer's slow half-circle walk deliberate and contemptuous. She watched the moment Greer grabbed the collar of Marcus's jacket, and she watched the slam. She heard the sound of it through the phone's small speaker, that flat, cracking impact, and it was somehow worse. Hearing it recorded reduced to pure sound and image stripped of the chaos of the moment. Then she watched herself get out of the car. She watched herself walk around the front of the sedan. She watched the badge go up. She heard Greer's voice clean and audible through the phone badge. "Or not, ma'am, your husband was non-compliant. I was within my rights." She watched it a second time without speaking. Marcus stood beside her, looking at the screen over her shoulder. His hand was pressed against his cheek. He said nothing. When the video ended the second time, something behind Celeste's eyes went very still and very focused, the way a person's attention narrows when they have found the exact point they needed to find. The way a hand goes still right before the most important cut. She handed the phone back to Devon. "I need you to send this to my number right now." She gave him the number from memory. "And I need you not to post it anywhere. Not tonight, not your friends, not a story, not anywhere." "Can you do that for me?" Devon was already pulling up her contact. "I got you." The file transferred in seconds. Celeste forwarded the footage immediately to her FBI partner, Agent Ray Donaldson, without any accompanying message. Donaldson had been her partner for 8 years. He would know exactly what he was looking at. She stepped a few feet away and called him. He picked up on the second ring. She told him the location, the officer's name and department, Dale Greer, Hargrove County Sheriff's Department, and the shape of what had happened. She told him they had clear, unedited video of the entire incident. She told him she was filing a formal complaint first thing in the morning. "We need to move carefully on this," she said. Donaldson said he understood. Don't do anything until I call you back." She lowered the phone. Reverend Gloria Marsh was a woman in her mid-70s who had the bearing of someone who had decided a long time ago that the appropriate response to difficulty was to move toward it rather than away from it. She was not tall, but she occupied space with an authority that had nothing to do with size and everything to do with the specific gravity of someone who had spent decades being the person a community called when things went wrong. She had marched in 1965. She had buried 4 neighbors during the crack epidemic of the late 80s. She had organized the food pantry at her church that had been running continuously for 31 years. She had seen things on this street that she kept in a particular chamber of her memory and did not discuss casually because some things need to be held carefully and with both hands. She came to Marcus and took his face in her own hands, turning it toward the porch light. She examined the cut with the efficient attention of someone who had cleaned and dressed a great many wounds in her time. "You need stitches." "No, ma'am," Marcus said. "It's shallow." "You sure, Reverend Marsh?" he said gently. "I'm a cardiologist." She looked at him for a long moment, with eyes that had seen enough of the world to know when a person was minimizing something for the benefit of the people around them. Then she patted his cheek, the uninjured one, just once gently, and said, "Your mama is going to lose her mind when she sees this." "I know," he said quietly. His mother had appeared in the doorway of her house across the yard. She had come out onto the porch and looked at her son's face from across the distance of the yard, at the cut on his cheek, at the way the jacket hung wrong at the shoulder, at the particular way he was holding himself that mothers learn to read before their children can speak, and her hand had gone flat against her chest. She had not said a single word. She had simply pushed the screen door open wider and waited. Inside at the kitchen table, she pressed a clean cloth dampened with antiseptic to Marcus's cheekbone, with hands that were shaking in a small but continuous way she could not quite stop. She was not crying. The shaking was somehow worse than crying would have been. It was the shaking of a woman who had raised a son in this country, and who understood with a precision that decades of experience had sharpened to something almost surgical. Exactly how close things can come and how little the particular qualities of a person, their education, their profession, their good intentions, the silver buttons on their father's jacket have to do with the distance between close and something irreparable. Celeste stood in the hallway with her phone at her ear. Her voice was low and controlled. "We need to move carefully, but we will move." She looked back through the kitchen doorway at Marcus sitting still, while his mother's hands worked, and for a moment in the privacy of that hallway, she let herself feel the full weight of it, not the professional assessment of it, but the plain human weight of what had been done to her husband on a quiet Sunday evening. She felt it completely and fully, for exactly as long as she allowed herself to feel it. Then she filed it away. There was work to do. Celeste did not sleep. She sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open and a cup of coffee that had gone cold without her noticing. Building the case, brick by careful brick cross-referencing Greer's name against the department roster, pulling every public record she could access, compiling the documentation that Vivian Cross would eventually need. The legal pad beside the laptop was filling up with her small, precise handwriting. Her phone rang at 10 minutes past 5 in the morning. "Donaldson." She picked up on the first ring. "It's out," he said. "No greeting, no lead-in. The video is out, Celeste. A Memphis station has it. They're running it right now." She closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Then she opened them. How Devon sent it to 3 friends last night. It was spreading fast. A station tipster had it within the hour. She went to the living room and turned the television on, keeping the volume low. She found the Memphis station quickly. The anchor was mid-sentence, the footage already playing on the screen behind her. Hargrove Street, the black Lexus, the blue lights, Marcus stepping out with his hands raised, and then the sound of it. Celeste stood in the middle of her mother-in-law's living room and watched her husband get slammed onto the hood of his own car on the live television, and she stood very still. And she watched all of it, and she let the thing she had filed away in the hallway come back briefly, because she was alone and it deserved that. Then she heard movement behind her. Marcus appeared in the hallway doorway in a plain white undershirt, his church jacket gone the cut on his cheekbone, dark against his skin in the gray morning light. He looked at the television screen. His body went completely still. His mother appeared behind him, tying the belt of her robe at the waist, and stopped when she saw what was playing. Nobody spoke. They watched Celeste walk around the front of the car on the screen. They watched the badge go up. They heard Greer's voice come through the television speakers clear and sharp. "Badge, or not, ma'am. Your husband was non-compliant. I was within my rights." Marcus's mother sat down slowly in her armchair. She gripped both armrests with both hands and stared at the screen and said nothing at all. And that nothing, the specific held quality of it, the weight of a woman who had too much to say and nowhere near enough words, was somehow the most devastating response of any of the three of them. Marcus crossed the room and sat on the arm of her chair and placed his hand over hers. The television kept playing. By 10 that morning, the clip had been picked up by every major national network. The Hargrove County Sheriff's Department released a statement, 4 sentences expressing confidence in the integrity of its officers, stating that all use-of-force incidents were subject to thorough internal review, announcing in the 4th sentence that an officer had been placed on paid administrative leave pending the outcome of that review. Officer Greer's name appeared nowhere in the statement. Celeste read the statement twice. Then she looked across the table at Donaldson, who had arrived from Memphis an hour earlier. "Paid leave," she said. It's the beginning of something, she corrected herself before he could respond. She straightened her legal pad. "Let's go to the department." That same morning, while Celeste was driving to the sheriff's department, Dale Greer was sitting at his kitchen table in his undershirt watching the coverage on his laptop, with a cup of coffee in his hand, and he was not particularly worried. He had been here before. He had been in situations before where something he did made the news for a week or two, where people posted things online and called the department with complaints, where a supervisor had him come in and sit across a desk and use careful language about procedure and optics and community relations. He had been through that cycle 3 times in 19 years, and all 3 times the cycle had run its course and ended in the same place, him still wearing the badge. He watched the clip play. He watched himself walk around the car. He watched himself grab the man's jacket and put him on the hood. He watched the woman get out and show her badge. He closed the laptop. Sandra Holt would handle it. She always handled it. That was the arrangement, had been for years. He did the work on the street, the kind of work that kept certain neighborhoods from getting too comfortable, and she ensured that the paperwork reflected something manageable. 27 complaints in 19 years. And not a single one had stuck. Not one. The machine had been reliable for a very long time. He poured more coffee and went to get dressed. He felt, if anything, mildly annoyed. The FBI badge was a complication, but it was a complication he had already thought through. She was the man's wife. She had a conflict of interest. Any complaint she filed would be questioned on that basis alone. He had heard Holt's voice in his head clear as if she were in the room. These things take time, but they go away. They always go away. Greer was confident, the way a man is confident, when the system has protected him so many times that he has stopped being able to imagine what it would look like if it didn't. That confidence was, as it turned out, the most expensive thing he owned. The Hargrove County Sheriff's Department occupied a wide corner lot on the main street of downtown Hargrove, all beige brick and tinted glass, and American flags snapping in the morning wind from a pole out front. Celeste placed her credentials on the front desk counter without being asked. "Special Agent Celeste Webb, FBI Civil Rights Division. I'm here to file a formal complaint regarding an incident involving Officer Dale Greer and to notify the department of my intent to open a preliminary inquiry. I'd like to speak with whoever is in charge." Minutes later, Deputy Chief Sandra Holt appeared. Holt was a woman who looked like she had built her entire career around never being caught off guard. Silver hair cut close and neat. Uniform pressed to a precision that looked effortless and wasn't. Posture so correct it appeared structural. She walked toward Celeste with her hand already extended, her expression calibrated to the exact level of warmth and authority that communicates, "I am controlling this room now." Holt's office was tidy in the way that certain offices are tidy. Not the tidiness of someone naturally organized, but of someone who understands that a disordered desk communicates something they do not wish to communicate. Awards on the wall arranged by size. Nothing personal. She sat down, folded her hands on the desk, and looked at Celeste with practiced, professional sympathy. "I've seen the video," she said before Celeste could open her mouth. "Then you know why I'm here." "I do." A slow nod, measured. "And I want to assure you that this department takes all use of force concerns with the utmost seriousness." She paused just long enough to signal that the next part had been prepared well before this meeting, and then Officer Greer responded appropriately to a non-compliant subject. The presence of a federal credential does not retroactively alter an officer's threat assessment at the time of a stop. We will be conducting a full internal review, and I can assure you that review will be thorough and fair. Celeste looked at her steadily. She did not rush. She let the silence sit for exactly long enough that Holt felt the weight of it before Celeste filled it. "Your officer seized a physician with no criminal record who had both hands visible and had complied with every instruction given to him," she said. Her voice carried no anger. Anger would have given Holt something to manage. This was something else, the flat, unadorned clarity of someone reading facts into a record. He did so on the basis of a lane infraction that does not appear in any dashcam footage and that no independent witness corroborates. He then physically assaulted that physician for the act of asking a legally protected question about the basis of his stop. He subsequently dismissed a direct identification by a federal agent on a public street. She paused. "That is not a use of force concern, Deputy Chief. That is a federal civil rights violation. You know it. I know it. And the 16 witnesses who were standing on their porches when it happened know it." Something moved behind Holt's eyes at the word 16. A recalculation. Brief, controlled, and visible to anyone who was not watching for it. But Celeste was watching for it. Holt tilted her head slightly. "I understand you're upset, Agent Webb. That's completely understandable given your personal connection to the subject of the stop." A pause, warm, almost to sympathetic. "Which does raise a question worth considering. Your relationship to Dr. Webb creates a significant conflict of interest. Using your federal position to intervene in a matter involving your own family and then opening a federal inquiry into the department that handled that matter. That's the kind of thing that raises serious questions about professional conduct." Her voice stayed even, warm, almost gentle. "I'd imagine your bureau would be quite concerned about an agent using her credentials for what could be characterized as a personal grievance." The room was very quiet. It was a beautiful threat. Clean, professional, completely deniable. No raised voices, no fingerprints. Just a door swinging shut on well-oiled hinges, with the sound of an institution protecting itself by turning the person asking the questions into the problem. Celeste looked at Holt for a long, unhurried moment. She let the silence confirm that she had heard every word, understood every word, and was not moved by any of it. Then she reached into her bag and placed her copy of the formal complaint on the desk between them, precisely in the center of the desk where it could not be moved without being noticed. "You'll find everything in order," she said. She stood. She straightened her jacket. She picked up her bag. "Have a good morning, Deputy Chief." She walked out of the office, down the hallway, through the lobby, out through the front door, and into the morning air. She crossed the parking lot to the car. She sat behind the wheel and looked through the windshield at the beige brick building for 30 full seconds without expression. Then she picked up her phone. "Donaldson," she said. "They're going to make the badge the problem." Ray Donaldson arrived from Memphis in his dark blue sedan that afternoon, broad-shouldered, almost entirely unreadable, as a default mode of being, with the patience of someone who had learned that the most important information almost always arrived slightly later than expected. He shook Marcus's hand at the front door with a firm, steady grip and said, "Dr. Webb, glad you're standing," Marcus said. "So am I." They settled at the kitchen table with laptops and legal pads and fresh coffee. Marcus's mother moved around the edges of the kitchen without being asked, refilling cups, placing a plate of biscuits at the center of the table that no one touched but that everyone appreciated. Reverend Gloria Marsh arrived at 4 o'clock exactly. She knocked twice, 2 firm, deliberate knocks, and then opened the door and came in without waiting. The way she had been coming in and out of this house for 30 years. She was carrying a cardboard box with both arms holding it against her chest, with the care of someone transporting something fragile and irreplaceable. She crossed the kitchen and set it on the table in the space between the laptops and the coffee cups, and straightened up with the careful deliberateness of someone who has been waiting for this moment for a very long time. "I have been waiting," she said simply. She looked at Celeste. "For someone worth giving this to. How long have you had this? Years of collecting." She pulled out the chair across from Celeste and sat down. "And I had every document in it notarized, because I have always known that the day would come when I needed someone to take it seriously." Inside the box were folders, each one labeled by year in Reverend Marsh's careful handwriting. Every folder contained signed and dated personal testimonies written on lined notebook paper. People's own accounts in their own words, organized chronologically. Photographs, handwritten complaint records that bore no departmental file numbers because they had clearly never entered any official system. Copies of letters addressed to the Hargrove County Sheriff's Department, dated across a span of years, that had received no response. Celeste and Donaldson worked through the files, which beside methodically. Marcus sat across the table and read folder after folder in silence. His face tightened with each one, degree by degree, the way a fist slowly closes around something it cannot release. Dale Greer's name appeared in the files with a frequency that was not accidental. A stop and search of a man named Thomas Reese, 44 years old, a maintenance worker walking home from a late shift on a Friday evening. No stated cause, no arrest, no record of what was found because nothing had been found. Just a man standing on a sidewalk with his hands up while another man went through his pockets. An incident involving a 67-year-old retired postal worker named Harold Briggs. Harold had been walking his dog, a small beagle named Pepper, on a Tuesday morning at 7 a.m. Greer had stopped him, demanded identification, and when Harold had asked why Greer had grabbed his arm, and Harold had pulled back instinctively, and Harold had ended up in the emergency room at Hargrove County General with a hairline fracture of his right wrist. The complaint Harold filed, written out longhand, signed and dated, witnessed by Reverend Marsh, and notarized at the credit union on 4th Street, had been dismissed within 10 days. The closure document bore a signature Celeste now recognized from the meeting that morning. 3 separate residents on the same 2-block stretch of Hargrove Heights pulled over in front of their own homes within a single calendar month. Different days, different times, different vehicles. Same officer, same lack of a chargeable infraction. Every single complaint filed against Greer had been dismissed or quietly closed at the departmental level. Every single closure document bore Deputy Chief Sandra Holt's signature. Donaldson had his laptop open while they worked through the folders. He pulled up Hargrove County's public property records, then layered in commercial rezoning proposals filed with the Hargrove City Council over the past several years. He turned the laptop so Celeste could see it. The rezoning zones were marked in red. The red and the blue parcels, bishimostis, perfectly on top of each other. 3 zip codes, all 3 historically black neighborhoods, all 3 in the path of a proposed commercial development that had been in various stages of city council consideration for the past 4 years. And Hargrove Heights, the neighborhood where Reverend Marsh had lived for 40 years, where Marcus's mother had raised him, where Thomas Reese walked home from work on Friday nights, and Harold Briggs walked his beagle on Tuesday mornings, sat at the center of the map like the bullseye of something that someone had decided was valuable enough to clear out. Donaldson spent another hour working through public city council minutes and campaign finance records. The rezoning proposal had 3 co-sponsors, a man named Barrett Whitmore, representing District 4, a woman named Carol Vance, representing District 7, and a man named Preston Hull, representing District 9. He traced Hull's campaign finance contributions through a holding company to a real estate development LLC. He traced that LLC through public filings until it connected cleanly and directly to campaign donations to the Hargrove County Sheriff's Department's Political Action Fund donations in the reporting cycle that covered the period during which Holt had signed off on every one of Greer's complaint dismissals. Celeste stood up from the table and walked to the window. She looked out at Hargrove Street in the gathering evening, the oak trees, the painted porches, the church on the corner, The architecture of it assembled itself with the inexorable clarity of something that was always true and is now simply visible. Scare people enough, make a neighborhood feel unstable enough, drive property values down enough, then buy cheap and build something profitable on it, and do all of this through law enforcement, which provides both the instrument and the cover simultaneously. Dale Greer was not a bad officer. He was a deployed instrument. Sandra Holt was not covering for a subordinate. She was operating a program. Celeste came back to the table and sat down. She pulled her legal pad close and began writing names, dates, amounts, connections. The kind of notes that become the spine of a federal case when they are done correctly. "This isn't one bad officer," she said. She looked at Donaldson, then at Reverend Marsh, who carried the expression of a woman who has known the answer to a question for years and has finally been asked it. "This is a managed program." Reverend Marsh did not look surprised. She looked relieved. When Celeste laid it all out for Marcus, the map, the campaign finance connections, the pattern of complaint dismissals, she did not soften a single element. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he looked at his coffee for a moment. "So we need more than the video," he said. "The video establishes the incident. What we have establishes a pattern. But to pursue the whole case, the civil rights violation, the financial connections, all of it, we need someone who can litigate it independently." Donaldson slid a business card across the table without looking up. Vivian Cross, Cross and Associates, Civil Rights Litigation. Everyone in the Civil Rights Division knew the name. Vivian Cross had built her reputation across a decade of federal civil rights cases against police departments in 4 states. Most of them had resulted in consent decrees, significant financial settlements, and in several notable cases, federal criminal referrals. She did not lose often. "She called after the video went up," Donaldson said. "Said she'd been watching Hargrove County for years and was waiting for the right case." Celeste dialed. 2 rings. Cross. "Ms. Cross. My name is Special Agent Celeste Webb, FBI Civil Rights Division. I believe we have something worth your time." She paused, looking across the table at Marcus, at the cut above his cheekbone that had darkened as the evening wore on. "Actually, I think we have something worth everyone's time." A brief silence on the other end, not hesitation, consideration. "Send me everything," Vivian Cross said. "All of it, every single page." Celeste lowered the phone and looked at Donaldson. He was already opening a new window on his laptop, beginning to compile the documentation. The kitchen table was covered in legal pads and open files. And Reverend Marsh's folders and Marcus's mother moved quietly along the edges, refilling coffee without being asked. And outside, the oak trees on Hargrove Street were holding the last of the day's light in their high branches, and something was beginning that was not yet finished, but was no longer simply a beginning. The phone rang at 5:40 in the morning, and Celeste knew from the hour alone what kind of call it was. Her SAC Special Agent in Charge, Victor Harmon, Memphis Field Office. A man she had worked under for 9 years, who had brought her onto 2 of the division's most significant cases during that time, who had written her performance evaluations with the kind of specificity that indicated he actually read the files. He was calling at 5:40 in the morning. She answered on the second ring. "Harmon, Celeste." His voice had the careful, measured quality that senior agents develop over long careers, the voice that withholds information before it has to deliver it. "I need you to come in this morning. My office as soon as you can." "What happened?" A pause. Short but precise. "We'll talk when you get here." She told Marcus she had a meeting at the field office. He was at the kitchen table with his coffee and his mother, and both of them looked up when she came downstairs. She kept her face neutral. She kissed his cheek, the uninjured one, and walked out to the car. The drive to Memphis took 45 minutes. She spent it identifying every possible version of what was waiting for her, lining them up in order of probability, working through each scenario and its implications. By the time she pulled into the field office parking structure, she had identified the most probable one with a confidence she would have put at around 80%. She sat in the car for 60 seconds. Then she went inside. Harmon was standing when she came in, not behind his desk, but in front of it, which she noticed and filed. He gestured to the chair and closed the door behind her. He remained standing for a moment, looking at the window, buying himself one last second before the words became real. Deputy Chief Sandra Holt contacted the office, he said, yesterday afternoon. She filed a formal letter questioning your professional objectivity and raising concerns about potential abuse of authority. She is claiming that you used your federal credentials to intimidate a local officer during a personal domestic matter. He held her eyes. She is also alleging that your opening of a preliminary inquiry into the same department constitutes a conflict of interest that rises to the level of potential misconduct. Celeste said I identified myself to an officer who was in the process of violating my husband's civil rights. That is standard protocol. The fact that the victim was my husband does not change the nature of the violation or the appropriate response to it. I know that, Harmon said. He sat down. He folded his hands on the desk. Celeste, there's more. He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk toward her. She looked at it without picking it up. A printout of a news article from a national publication published that morning. The headline read, FBI agent at Center of Tennessee traffic stop has prior conduct review, sources say. The article was carefully written. It never stated anything untrue. It simply revealed the existence of a letter of counseling in Celeste's personnel file from 9 years ago during an undercover operation in which a confidential informant's identity had been briefly compromised by a miscommunication in the field. The operation had succeeded. The informant had not been harmed. The letter of counseling had been the sole administrative consequence, issued, filed, and effectively forgotten within the ordinary course of a long federal career. The article did not say any of that. It said only that the letter existed, that it concerned a confidentiality breach, and that the agent named in it was the same agent who had intervened in the Hargrove incident. She leaked it, Celeste said. We believe so. The case was a success. I was never disciplined. That letter has had zero impact on my career record. I know. Harmon leaned forward. Celeste, I believe you. I want you to understand that clearly. But I am receiving pressure from above this office. The Bureau is concerned about the optics of an active agent conducting a preliminary inquiry into a department that is simultaneously filing conduct complaints against her. He stopped. Then he said the words she had already seen coming. I'm placing the inquiry on hold effective today, and I'm moving you to administrative desk duty until the conduct review is resolved. The office was very quiet. Celeste looked at the article on the desk between them. Then at Harmon's face, genuinely troubled, genuinely apologetic, utterly immovable. She asked one question. Did the case succeed? He said. Yes. Then we're done here, she said. She stood, straightened her jacket, and picked up her bag. Harmon said her name once more as she reached the door. She stopped. She did not turn around. I'm sorry, he said. I have to protect the institution. She walked out without answering. The parking garage under the field office was gray concrete and fluorescent light, and the particular kind of silence that accumulates in enclosed spaces where important decisions get made and then carried away in cars. Celeste sat behind the wheel for a long time after she got in. She did not start the engine. She looked at the concrete wall in front of the hood and she let herself feel the full weight of it. Not the professional assessment she was already doing, that on some level the part of her mind that never fully stopped. But the plain human weight, the specific cruelty of having the facts of your own good work used against you. Of having a career built with precision and integrity turned into a weapon by someone who had no interest in integrity and no compunction about the use of weapons. Holt had found the smallest, most deniable thing in Celeste's record and placed it in front of a national audience at the exact moment it could do the most damage. No raised voices, no fingerprints, no confrontation she could respond to directly. Just information released at the right moment, framed in the right way. It was in its own way extremely well executed. Celeste let herself feel something about that for a measured and finite period of time. Then she picked up her phone. Marcus answered on the second ring. His voice was cautious and alert. He had been awake and waiting. They turned my badge against us, she said quietly. Holt filed a conduct complaint, and she leaked something from my personnel file to the press. The Bureau put me on desk duty. Silence on the other end. Not the silence of someone who doesn't know what to say. The silence of someone processing information with the care it requires. Then we're going to do this a different way, she said. But we're going to do it. Tell me everything when you get back, Marcus said. I will. She paused. Don't go anywhere today. I'll be here. She started the car. On the drive back, she separated what was useful from what was simply pain. Pain was real, and she respected it, but it was not what the situation required. The desk duty was a complication, not a wall. Vivian Cross was not on desk duty. Donaldson was not on desk duty. Reverend Marsh's files were not on desk duty. The case was still being built. By the time she turned onto Hargrove Street, what remained was something cleaner and considerably more durable than anger. Marcus was on the front porch, waiting. He was standing before she had fully stopped the car, which told her he had been watching for her. He held the door without asking anything, yet which was one of 1,000 small reasons she had married him. His mother had made dinner, and they sat at the kitchen table and talked about ordinary things for an hour. A neighbor's new fence, an upcoming church fundraiser, a recipe his mother wanted to try. Normal conversation, the kind that keeps a family together when everything else is pulling at the seams. When his mother had washed the dishes, kissed them both, and gone to bed with the dignified discretion of a woman who understood when she was needed and when she was not. Celeste laid everything out for Marcus at the kitchen table. All of it. The call from Harmon, Holt's formal letter, the leaked personnel document, the article, the desk duty. She used plain language and did not soften a single element because Marcus Cornelius Webb was not a man who needed things softened, and she respected him too much to try. He listened completely. When she finished, the kitchen was quiet for a moment. Then Marcus looked down at his cup. So she made the badge the problem, he said. She tried. Can it work long term? Not if we build the case correctly. Not with what we already have. She looked at him. But we need more. We need the investigative weight to come from outside me now. He nodded slowly. Something settled in his expression. Not acceptance of what had been done to him or to her, but the particular resolution that comes when a person has finished deciding what they intend to do about something and is ready to begin doing it. He sat with his coffee for a while after she went back to her laptop. He sat on the back porch in the warm evening and looked at his mother's garden, the old oak tree at the back corner. A producer from a national television network had left 3 respectful, persistent messages throughout the day. Dr. Webb, we would like to give you the opportunity to tell your story in your own words. His own words. He thought about the years he had spent choosing his words so carefully that some conversations had ended, with him having said almost nothing at all. He thought about Harold Briggs, whose name he had read in Reverend Marsh's files that afternoon, the older man who had ended up in an emergency room with a broken wrist on a Tuesday morning while walking his dog. Harold Briggs had never been asked to tell his story in his own words. Nobody had called Harold with a polite and persistent offer. Harold had written his account out by hand on lined paper and given it to Reverend Marsh, and it had sat in a cardboard box for years, waiting for someone who would take it seriously. Marcus went inside and called the producer back. He did not tell Celeste before he did it. Not to deceive her. He knew exactly what she would say. She would be professionally right. And he understood why she would be professionally right. But he had reached the moment where professionally right was not sufficient. There are moments when a man has to speak because the cost of silence is its own kind of damage accumulated slowly and distributed across every person who has ever been in a situation like his and stayed quiet because the safer option seemed like the wiser one. The interview crew arrived the following afternoon. 2 cameras, a sound technician, a lighting director. They set up in the living room. Marcus sat in the armchair by the window in his repaired church jacket. Someone, his mother, he suspected, because she had that particular form of quiet attention to the things that mattered, had stitched the shoulder seam back together so neatly that you had to look for the repair to find it. He spoke without a script and without performance. He had been a cardiologist for over a decade. He had delivered hard news to families in hospital corridors under fluorescent light, and he had learned early in his career that the truth lands harder when you do not dress it up. He described what happened on Sunday evening on Hargrove Street with the same factual precision with which he would document a case. The speed he had been traveling, the hands raised, the narrated movements, The question he had asked. The jacket his father had given him. He did not raise his voice. He did not perform outrage. He simply told what happened, and that quiet precision was more devastating than any amount of anger would have been, because it left no room for the audience to argue with the emotion, and every reason to sit with the facts. The camera caught the remnant of the bruise at the edge of his cheekbone, already fading, but still visible a shadow of what had been done there. It said more than any particular words could have said. The interview went nationally viral before midnight. By the following morning, the story had become something too large and too public for any single department to manage. The hashtag spread to every major platform. Civil rights organizations that had been watching Hargrove County for years issued formal statements. A U.S. Senator's office sent a formal letter to the Department of Justice requesting a comprehensive review of the department's use of force practices. News networks ran the interview clip in heavy rotation, pairing it with the original video from Devon's phone, and the juxtaposition, the quiet, factual account by the man whose face still bore the evidence of what had been done to him, created the kind of sustained national attention that institutional inertia finds very difficult to sustain itself against. The DOJ had been monitoring the situation since the video first appeared. The combination of Vivian Cross's forthcoming filing the national coverage and the senator's letter moved the matter to a level requiring a direct and documented response. Harmon called Celeste at 11 in the morning. "It's lifted," he said. "The hold on your inquiry. You're restored to full active duty, effective immediately." She drove to Memphis that afternoon. Harmon met her in the hallway outside his office, rather than behind his desk. She noticed and filed it. He held out her credentials with both hands, the leather case and the gold badge, with the care of someone who understands the weight of what they are returning. "The letter of counseling from 9 years ago has been formally reviewed," he said. "It's been removed from your file completely. No relevance to any finding of misconduct. It's gone." Celeste took her credentials. She looked at them for one moment, at the gold badge, at her own face on the identification card, at the seal that represented the institution she had served for 16 years and that had briefly been used against her. Then she slid the credentials into the inner pocket of her blazer, right where they belonged. Harmon said quietly, "I should have held the line." Celeste looked at him. There were a number of things she could have said that were true, and that would have landed exactly as hard as they deserved to land. She chose none of them because choosing them would have made her feel better and would not have made the case stronger. "Yes," she said simply. "You should have." She turned and walked back down the hallway toward the elevator, her credentials against her chest, her steps steady and even. Marcus placed the call after breakfast on a Thursday morning. The man he called was named Garrett Odom. Garrett was the senior investigative reporter at the national desk of a major newspaper headquartered in New York. He had spent 15 years building a reputation for exactly the kind of patient, evidence-heavy investigative journalism that made institutions uncomfortable and changed things when it worked. Marcus had met Garrett Odom for the first time in a trauma bay at Memphis Memorial Hospital 8 years ago. Garrett had come in through the emergency room on a Tuesday night, massive cardiac event, mid-40s, no insurance, no family listed as next of kin, no one there with him. The ER team had stabilized him, and Marcus had been the attending who performed the surgery. It had gone well. Marcus had gone home that night and had not thought much more about it because that was the nature of the work. But Garrett Odom had thought about it every year since on the anniversary of the surgery, when he sent Marcus a handwritten card, not a printed one, handwritten on good paper, with a fountain pen in the careful handwriting of a man who understood that certain things should not be done carelessly. Marcus kept the cards in his desk drawer at the office. He had never once asked Garrett for anything. He was asking now. Garrett answered on the second ring. His voice had the warmth of someone genuinely glad to hear from you, and the alertness of someone who spent his professional life paying attention to what people said and how they said it. "Dr. Webb," he said. "It's been a minute." "It has," Marcus said. "Garrett, I need to ask you something. I'm not asking for favorable coverage or any editorial consideration. I'm asking for information." "Ask," Garrett said simply. "Do you know anyone who has compiled use of force data on Hargrove County, Tennessee, independently of the department itself?" A brief silence. The silence of someone who has just recognized the shape of something. I don't know off the top of my head, Garrett said slowly. But I know people who would know. Give me until morning. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. A pause. How's the cut healing? Marcus almost smiled. You saw the video. The whole country saw the video, Garrett said quietly. I'll call you at 7. He called at 7 exactly. Celeste came downstairs 3 minutes later and sat across from Marcus when she saw the look on his face. Marcus set the phone on speaker between them. Garrett's voice was in full reporter mode, crisp, organized, moving forward with purpose. I made 5 calls last night. There is a research center affiliated with a university in Nashville. They've been building a national law enforcement database for 6 years, use of force, incident data, traffic stop, demographics, complaint, resolution rates by department. Building it quietly because they did not want political pressure from departments before the data was solid. A brief pause. I spoke to the lead researcher this morning. Her name is Dr. Naomi Ellis. She pulled Hargrove County before we hung up. Marcus leaned forward slightly. Across the table, Celeste's pen was already moving. She's sending the full analysis to your wife's email, Garrett continued, but she gave me the headline directly. Hargrove County's physical use of force incidents are disproportionately concentrated in 3 specific zip codes. All 3 historically black neighborhoods, all 3 corresponding to the rezoning areas your partner identified. And Officer Greer's incidents specifically account for a statistically outsized share of all documented physical force used in Hargrove Heights. Another pause. Dr. Ellis's words, not mine. The statistical probability of that concentration occurring without deliberate deployment policy is essentially 0. The kitchen was completely quiet. Marcus looked at Celeste. She was writing again, her handwriting moving across the legal pad in the small, precise lines that meant she was building something she intended to keep. Garrett, she said, looking up. How fast can you turn a full investigation? I've been working on Hargrove County, he said, and there was something in his voice that had the quality of someone who had been waiting for this sentence. I have the rezoning documents, the campaign finance records, the council members' property interests, and Dr. Ellis's analysis. I have Reverend Marsh's notarized files from which your partner was kind enough to provide summary documentation. A pause. I just need one more thing. What Marcus asked. A photograph, Garrett said. Of you, Marcus. Your face. The cut. Dr. Ellis's email arrived with the thoroughness of someone who had spent 6 years building something she believed in. Pages of data tables, charts, narrative analysis, written with the precision of a researcher who understood that her findings needed to be unassailable, written not only for academic colleagues, but for courtrooms and congressional offices and newsrooms. Celeste read every word. Donaldson, who had driven back from Memphis, sat beside her going through the appendices. The numbers were not ambiguous. Zip code by zip code, street by street. Incident by incident, the data showed Hargrove Heights absorbing a disproportionate share of physical force from the Hargrove County Sheriff's Department, far beyond any statistical variance explainable by crime rates, call volume, or population density. Greer's incidents alone sat so far outside the norm for any single officer in comparable departments across the state that Dr. Ellis had flagged them separately with a statistical note that was essentially the academic equivalent of underlining something twice and putting a star beside it. The data did not editorialize. It simply showed in clean columns and precise percentages that something had been happening in this neighborhood that was not random and was not accidental and had been happening long enough to constitute a pattern with a structure. Donaldson forwarded the full report to Vivian Cross without being asked. His message to her was 4 words, "This is your spine." Cross called back within minutes. Her voice had the focused energy of someone assembling something large and precise, something that has been a long time coming and is finally ready to be built. Combined with Reverend Marsh's notarized documentation and the financial connection between Holt's department and Hull's LLC, she said this establishes pattern motive and coordinated conduct across a sustained period. I can file a federal civil rights complaint that will not be buried, not with this behind it. How long do you need? Celeste asked. I'm filing within the week, Cross said. Every name. Vivian Cross walked into the U.S. District Court Clerk's office in Memphis 5 days later in a charcoal gray suit with a leather litigation bag over one shoulder. and the federal civil rights complaint under her arm. She placed the complaint on the counter, identified herself, and filed it with the calm efficiency of a woman who had done this many times before and intended to do it many more. Saeed. The complaint named 3 defendants, Officer Dale Greer individually and in his official capacity, Deputy Chief Sandra Holt individually and in her official capacity, and Hargrove County itself as the governing body, whose policies, budget decisions, deployment practices, and deliberate failure to address documented patterns of misconduct had created the conditions in which both individual defendants operated. The plaintiff was Dr. Marcus Allen Webb. The filing laid everything out in numbered paragraphs with the relentlessness of a well-built legal argument. Greer's documented incidents from Reverend Marsh's notarized files. Dr. Ellis's statistical analysis. The financial connection between Holt's department and Preston Hull's LLC. The rezoning timeline mapped against the escalation of use-of-force incidents in the 3 target zip codes. The full documented sequence of the evening of the incident, the stop, the demand, the slam the badge. Greer's response, supported by Devin Marsh's unedited video footage, entered into evidence as Exhibit A. Celeste read the final stamped version at the kitchen table with Donaldson beside her. Reading it felt like a door kicked open that could not be closed. Her phone buzzed. "Vivian Cross, I'm filing. Every name." Dale Greer was in his kitchen at 7:15 in the morning, in a white undershirt pouring his first cup of coffee, when the knock came. 3 strikes, heavy, deliberate, measured. The kind of knock that carries authority in its rhythm. Not a neighbor, not a delivery driver, not anyone he was expecting. The kind of knock that has a specific and irreversible purpose. He set his coffee mug down and walked to the front door in his undershirt and his uniform trousers and his socks. He pulled the door open. 4 people stood on his porch, plain clothes, badges on their belts visible not displayed, expressions neutral in the way of people for whom neutrality of expression is a professional practice developed over years. The person at the front, a woman measured and unhurried with the posture of someone who finds most situations smaller than the situations she has handled, held a sealed envelope out toward him with both hands. Federal civil rights violation charges. His name printed on the first line. He took the envelope. He looked at it. He looked at the agents. He looked at the envelope again. His coffee mug was still on the kitchen counter. He could smell it from the doorway. He did not say anything for a long time because there was nothing useful left to say. "You'll want to contact an attorney," the lead agent said. Her voice was calm and professional and carried no affect whatsoever. "Today." They left. They turned and walked back down the porch steps and along the front path and got back into their vehicles without hurrying, without looking back, without anything that might suggest this was a notable or unusual event in their professional lives. He stood in his own doorway, in his undershirt, with the federal documents in his hand and the morning air coming in cold around him and the smell of his coffee still reaching him from the counter. A neighbor was walking a dog across the street. 2 kids were riding bikes at the end of the block, laughing at something. The morning was entirely ordinary and entirely indifferent to the fact that the 19-year career of Dale Greer had just reached its terminal point. He went inside. He sat at the kitchen table and spread the federal documents out next to his untouched coffee and read them. He read them again. He pulled up the Hargrove County Sheriff's Department's official statement on his phone. They had posted it that morning. 4 sentences. The department expressed confidence in the justice system. The department stated it was cooperating fully with all relevant authorities. The department was committed to maintaining the public trust. The department did not mention Dale Greer's name. Not once. Not a single word of support, not a suggestion that they stood behind him, not a promise to fight for him. He was the cost of doing business. He understood that now with a clarity that the previous weeks had been obscuring. He was a tool that had been used and was now inconvenient, and inconvenient tools were set aside without ceremony. The machine did not grieve its parts. He picked up his phone and searched for a private criminal defense attorney. The preliminary federal hearing was held 3 weeks after the filing in a conference room on the 4th floor of the federal building in Memphis, a room that smelled of carpet cleaner and recirculated air, and the particular flat neutrality of spaces designed for difficult things. Greer sat at one side of the long table in a collared shirt, no uniform, no badge. His private defense attorney, a man named Strickland, who had the tired eyes of someone who had reviewed too many discovery files in too little time, sat beside him. Across the table sat Vivian Cross and Agent Ray Donaldson. At the far end, Celeste Webb. Her credentials were visible on the table in front of her, placed there deliberately in the exact center of her position at the table where they could not be missed. She had not spoken since the hearing began. Vivian Cross opened without preamble. She outlined the charges with the efficiency of a person who has built this argument so many times in preparation that delivering it in the room feels almost easy. Deprivation of rights under color of law, assault under color of authority, pattern of civil rights violations as established by documented evidence. She referred to the statistical analysis. She referred to the notarized testimony files. She referred to the rezoning map. Strickland made the expected objections. Cross addressed each one in turn briefly and completely. Then she said, "I'd like to play the video." She pressed a button on the laptop in front of her. The screen at the far wall lit up. Dale Greer watched himself walk up to the driver's side of the Lexus. He watched himself stand at the window. He heard his own voice, flat, presumptuous, the voice of someone who has made a decision about who the person in front of him is before a single word has been exchanged. He watched Marcus step out of the car with both hands raised to shoulder height. He watched himself do the half-circle walk. He heard himself say, "You people." He watched his own hand grab the collar of the charcoal jacket and slam the man forward onto the hood. He heard the sound of it through the conference room's speakers. In the 19 years of his career, he had never heard that sound from the outside. From the outside, it sounded like something breaking that had not been broken before and could not be unbroken. It sounded small and enormous at the same time. He watched the passenger door open. He watched Celeste walk around the front of the car. He watched the badge go up, and he heard his own voice, still flat, still deliberate, still completely certain of itself, say, "Badge or not, ma'am, your husband was non-compliant. I was within my rights." Cross paused the video on the frozen frame of his face on the screen. The conference room was silent. Greer looked at the image of himself on the screen, the jaw set, the flat gray eyes. He looked like a man who had never once considered that anything he did might have consequences he couldn't walk away from. He looked for the first time at Celeste Webb. She was looking back at him with an expression he had not seen on a person before and could not quite name, not anger, not satisfaction, not triumph. It was something more precise than any of those. It was the expression of someone who has done the work correctly and who is now simply present for what the work produces. He looked down at his hands on the table. His hands were not shaking. They were perfectly still, which was somehow worse because it meant the stillness was all that was holding anything together. Strickland leaned toward him and said something quietly. Greer didn't hear it. He heard very clearly the sound of the hood again, coming through the speakers of a conference room in a federal building on a morning when his coffee was getting cold at home with his name on a federal document and no department statement that remembered he existed. Vivian Cross closed her laptop. "The United States has submitted its complete evidentiary file," she said. She looked at Strickland. "Mr. Strickland." Strickland shuffled his papers. His client was not going to trial. Strickland had known it since he opened the discovery file, but he had waited for his client to know it too. His client knew it now. "We'd like to discuss the parameters of a potential agreement," Strickland said carefully. Cross nodded. She had expected nothing else. Celeste picked up her credentials from the table and slid them back into the inner pocket of her blazer. She stood. She looked at Dale Greer one more time, at the man who had walked away from her on Hargrove Street with the absolute certainty that the machine would protect him. The machine had read the federal filing and made a business decision. The machine had cut him loose. And now he was sitting in a government conference room in a collared shirt without a badge, watching himself on a screen, understanding for the first time in 19 years that the thing he had believed was protecting him had only been tolerating him, and that tolerance, it turned out, had conditions. She walked out of the conference room without looking back. Sandra Holt had watched the filing move through the public record with the attention of someone reading their own test results, searching in every line for the technical error. The procedural gap, the piece of language imprecise enough to create distance between herself and what the document was saying. She found nothing. Vivian Cross had been too methodical. Garrett Odom's investigation had been too precise. Dr. Ellis's statistical analysis had removed every place that departmental language might have provided cover. Holt contacted a federal prosecutor she knew professionally. A quiet call, the kind that begins with carefully neutral language and ends with a clear mutual understanding of what cooperation might be worth. She was cooperating formally within a week of the filing, confirming the concentrated deployment of Greer's patrols in the 3 target zip codes, the pattern of complaint dismissals she had authorized, the unspoken financial arrangement that had kept those neighborhoods destabilized for the benefit of people above her pay grade. It had never been written down. It had never been stated plainly in any document. It had existed the way certain understandings exist between people who have worked together long enough to operate without needing to say things out loud. She signed her resignation letter. It was 3 sentences. It said nothing. Barrett Whitmore, Carol Vance, and Preston Hull watched their names travel through the news cycle in the days that followed. Each new wave brought their financial connections closer to the surface. The donations, the rezoning timeline, the coordinated nature of what had been done to 3 neighborhoods over years. All 3 announced separately and within hours of each other that they would not be seeking re-election. The commercial rezoning proposal for Hargrove Heights and the other 2 historically black zip codes was formally withdrawn from the city council agenda. A single administrative sentence in a set of meeting minutes, ending years of a campaign that had never been publicly acknowledged. In her living room on Hargrove Street, Reverend Gloria Marsh watched the evening news with her hands folded in her lap. The anchor read the names one by one: Greer, Holt, Whitmore, Vance, Hull. The way a list gets read when the reading of it is the conclusion rather than the beginning of something. When the segment ended, she reached over and turned off the television. She sat in the quiet living room for a long moment, the familiar sounds of the street coming through the window. Then she folded her hands more tightly and bowed her head. Not in defeat, in gratitude. Marcus called Celeste at the end of that day. She was at her desk at the field office, the Memphis skyline, going amber in the late afternoon light. "Is it over?" he asked. "The legal part," she said carefully, "is just beginning. Greer's case will take months. The county is facing a federal process that could take longer. Holt's cooperation means more depositions, more filings, more time." A pause. But the part where they get to pretend none of this happened. She picked up her credentials from the desk and turned them over once in her hand. "That part is over." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Come home for dinner," he said. "I'll be there soon," she said. On a Saturday morning several weeks later, Marcus turned the black Lexus onto Hargrove Street, with both hands on the wheel, the way he always had, the way his father had taught him, the way he intended to keep doing for every mile of road that remained ahead of him. The oak trees had started turning at their edges, the first faint traces of amber and gold working in from the tips of the leaves, the way fall always arrived in Tennessee, slow and quiet at first, almost tentative, then all at once. The neighborhood looked exactly as it had always looked. The painted porches, the old oak trees, the Baptist church on the corner with its marquee sign. And yet the light coming through the turning leaves fell differently on the sidewalks and front yards than it had the last time he drove this street, though he could not have said precisely why. Some things that change do not change the physical world around them. They change the quality of attention you bring to it. Celeste sat in the passenger seat in her cream blazer, legs crossed, hands folded. The same seat, the same suit, the same street, and everything was different. And both of those things were entirely simultaneously true. Marcus parked in front of his mother's house and turned off the engine. They sat for a moment in the quiet of the car without speaking. "Ready," Celeste said. He looked at her, at the woman who had stepped out of a car on this street with a gold badge in her hand and not one tremor in her voice, who had walked into a deputy chief's office and delivered the truth plainly and without performance, who had sat on desk duty for 11 days while the institution she had served for 16 years used her own record against her, and who had come back from that, not smaller but more precise, the way certain materials become more precise under pressure, harder and clearer and more exactly themselves. Who had built a case brick by careful brick while her husband's face was still healing? Who had made every call that needed to be made and written every note that needed to be written and never once lost sight of what the case was actually about, which was not a legal instrument, which was a street and the people who lived on it? "Yeah," he said. "I'm ready." He was wearing his church jacket, the charcoal gray one, with the silver buttons his father had given him. His mother had stitched the shoulder seam back together so cleanly that you had to look for the repair to find where it had been torn. When they stepped out of the car, people came. Not a crowd, not at first, not organized or directed. Just the way people come out of houses and driveways and off porches in a neighborhood where they have lived alongside each other long enough to move together without needing to be told to. Faces Marcus had known his whole life emerged from their front doors and gate lines and porch chairs with expressions that held things years of compliance and silence and swallowed in dignity, and small insistent hope had been building toward without anyone being certain there would ever be a destination. The woman from 2 blocks over, whose account appeared in one of Reverend Marsh's folders, the account of a Saturday afternoon when her groceries sat melting in the back of her car, while Greer stood on the sidewalk and decided what to do with her next. The family whose complaint had come back with Holt's closure signature on it. The family who had filed it anyway, because Reverend Marsh had said, "Write it down because the day will come." The neighbors who had stood on their porches the night of the incident and watched and not known whether watching was all they would ever be able to do. And Harold Briggs standing near the back of the group, straight-backed and deliberate with the cane he had been using since the morning Dale Greer had broken his wrist while he was walking his beagle on a Tuesday morning when the world was supposed to be ordinary. Harold was a dignified man, unhurried with the kind of quiet in him that comes from having survived things that did not deserve to be survived quietly. When Marcus's eyes found him across the yard, Harold gave one slow, deliberate nod. Not performative, not dramatic. The nod of one person acknowledging another across a shared understanding of something that does not require more words than that. Marcus nodded back. Nobody made a speech. Nobody had organized this gathering, called it, scheduled it, or announced it anywhere. It had simply happened the way things happen in places where people have lived alongside each other, long enough to know what the moment requires without being told. Reverend Gloria Marsh came down her porch steps, one at a time, holding the railing with her right hand, taking each step with the careful dignity of a woman who had earned every one of her years. She crossed Hargrove Street toward them in the morning light, moving with the directness she brought to everything that mattered. When she reached Marcus, she took both of his hands in both of hers and looked up at his face, at the cheekbone that had healed cleanly. The cut entirely gone, now leaving nothing behind, no evidence visible to the eye that anything had ever happened there. She held his hands for a long moment without speaking. Then she said, "I told you this street has seen worse." Her voice was quiet and completely certain, the voice of someone speaking not from optimism but from long memory and earned knowledge. The voice of a woman who had been keeping faith with this block for longer than most people could remember. "I also told you it always finds its way back." Marcus looked at her. His throat tightened in the way a throat tightens when a person is holding something that is too true and too large to fit through regular speech. He did not try to say anything. He did not need to. Celeste stood on the sidewalk beside him, on the sidewalk where she had grown up, coming with him on Sundays, for 14 years, in front of the house where his mother had raised him, on the street that someone had tried through the careful and patient deployment of fear and authority, and years of accumulated indignity to hollow out from the inside. The morning light came through the turning oak trees in long gold bars, falling across the painted porches and the front steps and the faces of people who had stayed. She was not calculating anything in this moment. She was not managing a case or building a strategy or holding herself together against the weight of something pressing down. She was just standing here on solid ground beside her husband. Somewhere down the block, a child was laughing at something, a specific, unself-conscious laugh, the kind that belongs to a child who is completely absorbed in the moment and not thinking about anything before or after it. It was Celeste thought about the most ordinary and most beautiful sound in the world. Marcus put his arm around her shoulder. His mother appeared at the front window of her house, one hand pressed flat against the glass, watching her son standing tall on the street where she had raised him. The shaking that had been in her hands that Sunday night was entirely gone. They were pressed flat and still against the glass, and they were steady. Down the block on Reverend Marsh's porch steps, Devin sat in the morning sun with his hoodie pushed up to his elbows, his face easy and quiet. He looked like what he was, a young man who had pressed record hard at the right moment and kept a promise and watched what happened when evidence met persistence and persistence met justice. His phone was in his pocket. If this story moved you, if you believe that dignity deserves to be defended and that the truth deserves to be told all the way through, please subscribe to our channel. We have more stories just like this one waiting for you, and we read every single comment you leave for us. Thank you for staying until the end. Some stories are worth every word.